Welcome to session 6 in my All About Bees Swarming and Swarm Control video collection. Today we're looking at swarm control, i.e. what you do when you discover unsealed queen cells in your hive. To be blunt with you, most beekeepers I've met haven't a clue what they are doing when it comes to swarm control. And when asked, they will tend to merge one or two different methods together, which if carried out would be doomed to end in failure. I'll be covering the Pagden method, otherwise known as the artificial swarm, only because it is part of the beekeeping exam syllabus and you need to know how to perform it if you're taking exams. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother. I will then show you what I consider to be the best and easiest method, the Nucleus method of swarm control, and end with a modified Demaree, which also works. If you are enjoying these videos, it would help me if you click the like and subscribe buttons below, especially if you don't want to miss out on any new video releases, and I also welcome any comments, questions or updates. Beekeepers are terrified of swarm control, but shouldn't be, as it is relatively straightforward as long as you can find the queen. It's like anything else in life, practice makes perfect, or almost with swarm control. So have a go and do something when you see sealed or unsealed queen cells, as you will learn something each time you do. The traditional explanation of swarm control is that you have to separate one of these from the other two: flying bees, queen and nurse bees. We're going to look at the Pagden method next, where we actually separate the queen and flying bees from the brood and nurse bees. Here we have a colony that is preparing to swarm. You've seen unsealed queen cells and the queen is still present. Here's the equipment needed: a brood box, a floor, a stand, a crown board, queen excluder and frames of drawn comb. The first thing you need to do is make sure you have all your equipment ready near the hive. After smoking the hive entrance, wait for a minute or two and remove the supers and place to one side on an upturned roof, which is suitable for that purpose. Remove the colony to one side, about 4 feet to the right in this illustration. On a new stand on the original site, place a new floor, a queen excluder and a brood box filled with drawn comb. If you don't have drawn comb, you can use foundation. Find the queen and bring her on the frame she is found on, which contains some brood, back to the original hive. Make sure you destroy any queen cells on this frame that the queen is on. Place the stand about 4 feet to the right of the original hive. You place the queen excluder between the floor and the brood box. This is insurance in case they still want to swarm, which is more likely, by the way, if you are using foundation. Add a queen excluder on top of the brood box and then replace the supers, crown board and the roof. The flying bees will rejoin the queen on the original site, as this is where they are orientated to. The nurse bees, brood and unsealed queen cells are now in the moved colony 4 feet to the right. And as you have removed the supers, you may have to feed this colony. I would feed fondant after 24 hours as there is less excitement with fondant. On the original site is the queen on one frame of brood, empty frames of drawn comb or foundation, the flying bees and any of the original supers. After 7 days, move the old brood box to the other side of the hive, again about 4 feet away from the original site. This depopulates the colony even more, as the new foragers from the hive that was moved to the right 7 days earlier will return to where their hive was on the right, find it missing and will then find their way into the nearest hive, which is on the hive on the original site. The moved colony is so weak it will be incapable of throwing a swarm. We choose the 7 days timeline to move the hive, as during this time no virgin will have emerged from the queen cell. It's called the Hedden variant when you move the hive to the other side. The new queen to the left of that on the original site should fly, mate and begin laying. Make sure to check after 3 weeks or when lots of pollen is going in. The queen excluder can be removed from the hive on the original site when fresh brood is present. Check after a week. The default by the way, for any swarm control is to unite the colonies, and you can do that here. I would always say to keep the younger queen when uniting, or if you want to make it increase, move one hive to a new apiary more than 3 miles away. The disadvantage of an artificial swarm is that twice as much equipment is needed and you have to be able to find the queen. You need sufficient space in your apiary and it is very labour intensive. Also, the colony with the original queen on the original site is just not very swarm-like because the queen ends up with all the older bees, whereas in a natural swarm there are bees of all ages, but with many young bees. If you remember from an earlier video, 70% of bees under 10 days old in a colony leave with the swarm. A frequently stated idea, and one written into older books on beekeeping, is that swarms are composed of mainly older bees, but we know that this is to be incorrect. Work on the age of bees in swarms was conducted by Mr. D.M.T. Morland as head of the bee department of Ronstadt Experimental Station, and completed under his direction by Dr. Colin Butler in the late 1930s. In their experiment, for a period of weeks, frames of advanced brood were removed from colonies and placed in an incubator to allow bees to emerge in captivity. 12 hours later, approximately 500 to 1,000 emerged bees were ready to be marked by a dotted paint on their thorax. Once dry, batches were introduced to the 8 colonies which were part of the experiment. As the bees were young, they were readily accepted. With large numbers of introduced bees over several weeks, the colonies rapidly started swarm preparation. Issuing swarms were collected and hived away from the host apiary to ensure that no bees drifted back. All the marked bees from both the parent colony and the swarm were removed and counted to allow the percentage of bees of each age that issue with the swarm compared to those left behind to be calculated, and that's how we came up with that figure. Here you go. Peruse that at your leisure, but there are lots of young bees in swarms. The nucleus method of swarm control is, in my opinion, the only one that works as long as you do what you're supposed to do at the right time. I recommend this to all new beekeepers, and if you get confused with different methods, learn this one and keep at it until you get it right. When you are more experienced, you can make up nucleus colonies in any format you wish, but I always teach the 5-frame nucleus recipe to begin with. It consists of 2 frames of brood, preferably sealed brood, and the bees that were on the frames, 2 frames of pollen and stores, and the bees on them also, and these are placed on opposite outsides in the nuke box. And you also include 1 empty frame of drawn comb. If the nucleus is staying in the same apiary, which it can, then you need to shake 2 frames of bees into the nuke box, making sure you don't shake the queen in. You do this because any flying bees will return to the original hive, leaving the younger nurse bees to care for the brood. Also, if staying in the same apiary, you shouldn't feed the nucleus for 48 hours, as those flying bees that return to the original hive may tell their sisters that stores are readily available in the nuke next door, and as they are all from the same colony, smell-wise, there wouldn't be any guards to stop them robbing. Swarm prevention is just as, or even more important than swarm control, particularly for bee farmers who have hundreds of hives. It involves the beekeeper taking action before the bees go into swarming mode, and can result in them not trying to swarm at all if you get it right. For example, I used to take 100 double brood box hives to the oilseed rape in April in Scotland. These were buckfast type bees with prolific queens, so there would be large colonies, essential if you want a decent honey harvest. After the flow had been on for a week or 2, before any queen cells were being built, I would take a 3 or 4 frame nuke out of the top box of each colony, leaving the queen inside. These would be frames of sealed brood if possible, along with the bees that were on the frames, and I would then make the nuke up as described on the previous slide. The nuke would be removed to an apiary more than 3 miles away, and a sealed queen cell on the point of emergence, or a virgin or mated queen would be introduced. Back in the double box hives at the rape, I would replace the frames removed from the top box with frames of foundation and place these in the centre of the top brood box with the other frames on the outside. This worked 9 times out of 10 for me in preventing swarms, allowing the bees to continue collecting nectar and so give me a decent harvest. And allowed me to make up lots of nukes which I could later sell as part of my bee farming business. Removing the old queen with a frame or two from a colony that's preparing to swarm can prevent the swarm issuing, and that's control, and we'll look at that in more detail next. So let's have a look at the nucleus method of swarm control, and you do this when you see unsealed queen cells and the queen is still present. Get your spare nuke box ready and block the entrance with sappy grass. This is green grass that will wither over a day or two so the bees will be able to get out. First thing you need to do is find the queen and place her and the frame of brood she is on and the bees on that frame into the centre of the nuke box. It's important that no queen cells are on this frame. You don't want to put queen cells into the nuke. You need to add one more frame of sealed brood if possible, plus the bees on it, and 2 of stores, plus a frame of drawn comb. You can use frames of stores saved from other disease-free colonies, such as those on the rape if it's the right time of year. If staying in the same apiary, you then need to shake 2 frames of house bees into the nuke to bolster the numbers. Give each frame a little jiggle so the flying bees fly off, and then, holding each frame by the side bars, shake the frame down into the nuke box, stopping suddenly so that the bees fall off the frame into the box. You may need to practice this. You need to leave just one unsealed queen cell in the brood box of the original hive and mark that frame with a drawing pin so you know which frame the queen cell was on when you go back into the hive. Vital for this method to work is not leaving any other queen cells in the original swarming colony, so you do need to shake all the bees off each frame back into the brood box so you don't miss a queen cell. You can shake a frame you are keeping with an unsealed queen cell on by holding the frame horizontally with the top bar towards the floor, i.e. it's upside down, and that way the queen larva won't be dislodged from the queen cell and royal jelly. Again, the only reason this method won't work is if the beekeeper leaves more than one queen cell. Remember, the queen cell could be hidden by just 4 or 5 bees or hiding in a corner of the frame, so it's important. You destroy the queen cells by gouging them out with your hive tool or pinching them out with your finger and thumb. Locate the nuke to a shady position in the apiary, or you can leave it at the side of the parent colony about 3 or 4 feet away. Now this is where many beekeepers stop with the nucleus method, and this is why they fail. The bees who know they are queenless will have panicked and made lots of emergency queen cells. You need to take control of the situation and not let the bees control their future. It's important to go back into the original colony 7 days later. Not 5 days, not 9 days, but 7 days exactly, and destroy all the queen cells except the one that you marked. Remember, you put a drawing pin on the frame that will now be sealed. The 7 days is critical because even if the old queen laid an egg just before you removed her into the nuke, it would have taken 3 days for the egg to hatch, and the larvae will now be 4 days old. And the bees cannot make a queen from a 4-day-old larvae. So shake the bees off so you don't miss any queen cells. Be careful with your chosen queen cell. Remember, you can shake the frame as long as you hold the frame upside down. The bees are unable to make any more queen cells and are left with just the one queen in a queen cell, which they will allow to emerge. Hopefully she'll mate and she'll be laying in 3 or 4 weeks. You are now in control, not the bees. There are other matters to consider with the nucleus method. As the nuke has no flying bees, they will have returned to the original hive. Remember, you may need to feed the nuke after 2 or 3 days, and I would always recommend placing fondant on the top bars. This is far easier and does not cause the excitement like sugar syrup does. The nuke itself may still try and swarm, so check in there after 2 or 3 days to see if they are still making queen cells. If they are, destroy them, as long as the queen is still present. After 3 or 4 weeks, check the original hive for a new queen, and hopefully you will see that she is laying well. I've said previously that the default for swarm control is to unite the 2 colonies, and you can do that here, removing the older queen, and you will have a really strong foraging force, just in time for the main summer flow or even for the heather. A colony that has a new queen of that season is very unlikely to try and swarm again, as long as you give space for the queen to lay in the brood chamber and space for the bees to hang nectar to ripen. with more supers. Or if you want to make increase, you can allow both to build up and overwinter them. A word of warning though, if you don't want to make increase, you need to be able to cull queens, otherwise you will end up with too many hives for you to manage. The advantages of the Nucleus method of swarm control is that you haven't lost the workforce, the flying bees. Once the new queen is laying, no more swarm inspections are necessary, which will save you time. A new queen brings vigour back to the colony. Nucleus boxes are cheaper than a new complete hive, and you can easily make them yourself. The old queen in the nucleus acts as your insurance policy if the new queen is lost on a mating flight or doesn't get back to the hive. And as I said earlier, the nucleus can be united back for the main nectar flow. So what about the disadvantages? Well, some beekeepers have difficulty finding a queen, but that should be something that will come with experience. There is a depletion in foraging force for a short while. The dequeen colony may become bad-tempered. The nuke may continue swarm preparations. The advantages far outweigh the disadvantages though. Why don't you give it a go? And I will be delighted to hear how you get on with it. I'm now going to show you a modified Demaree method of swarm control that I also use, so I know it works. For this you need a Snellgrove brood, or you can make one yourself. I'll show you how later. In this modified Demaree method, we separate the queen and the flying bees from the nurse bees and the brood, and add space with drawn combs for the queen to continue laying. You will need a Snellgrove brood, which you can buy from suppliers, or your homemade modified one, a spare brood box containing drawn comb and an additional queen excluder. You will need to make at least 2 visits to the hive, and it takes 10 days to complete. The beauty of this method is that it keeps everything under one roof, which is handy if you don't have a lot of space in your apiary. The modified Snellgrove brood is essentially a much simplified Snellgrove brood, needing a top and bottom entrance at the front and a top entrance at the rear. It is easy to saw a wedge off the batten of the crown board and then use a screw to secure each wedge in place. The feed hole is covered in gauze, which allows the colony odour to circulate between the top and lower boxes, handy when uniting back. So here is our double brood box hive with a queen excluder above the queen and brood in the 2 lower boxes and 2 supers over that. You've inspected the hive and observed unsealed queen cells, so you need to take some action. First, set an empty brood chamber on a manipulating board beside the hive. Find the queen, she's marked and clipped, and put her, together with the comb and adhering bees on which she is found, in the centre of the new brood chamber. Put another frame of sealed brood and bees beside the frame containing the queen. Cut out any queen cells which are on these 2 frames, very important. Without shaking any bees, reassemble the hive as follows: floorboard, new brood chamber with queen and 2 frames, plus 7 empty frames of drawn comb, if available of course, plus the 2 outside combs from the original bottom brood chamber on the flanks. These will contain stores. If no drawn comb is available, foundation will have to be used. Then it's the queen excluder, the original 2 or 3 supers, crown board with feed holes open, the original brood chambers with the queen cells, a second crown board. Now this operation can also be used with single brood chamber management. If you are using double brood chambers, 2 may be required on top. In practice, these can be reduced to 1 the following week after some of the sealed brood is hatched out. The surplus combs are then used when artificially swarming other hives. If the queen cells are hanging down from what was the original top brood chamber, they are likely to be damaged against the crown board in this arrangement. So in which case a small eck, the one I use in autumn to accommodate apiguard containers, should be used. Go back to the hive on day 2. Overnight, the older flying bees will have joined the queen in the lower box, and the house bees will be with the brood in the top box. Remove the queen excluder below the top brood chamber and add the Snellgrove board with the front top entrance open. The flying bees from here will now return to the lower brood chamber entrance, as that is where they were orientated to. Return to the hive on day 5. You now close the upper front entrance and open the lower front entrance. The new flying bees are now diverted into the queen right boxes below. As the bees in the upper box have no exit, we now open the upper rear entrance to allow the bees to fly. You can, if you wish, reduce the queen cells in the top box to 1, although this is not necessary, as the population of bees has been so reduced they are unlikely to throw a swarm. On day 10, check the lower box for queen cells and destroy any that are present. Remove the queen excluder from the floor. The virgin queen will fly from and return to the rear upper entrance box. Check for her laying after 3 or 4 weeks. The modified Demaree I've shown you is successful by depopulation, i.e. the population of adult bees in the top box are dramatically reduced, making them very unlikely to throw a swarm. The upper brood box is so weakened and will usually just raise 1 new queen cell. With the queen and flying bees in the lower boxes, there's no break in honey production. You have the option to unite for a main flow or for the heather. It's not straightforward though, uniting, as the entrance to the upper box is facing in the opposite direction, isn't it? The way around this is to progressively turn the top box over a period of about 1 week until both entrances are facing the front, and then uniting the 2 boxes with newspaper. If you want to make increase, the top box is moved to an apiary more than 3 miles away. Phew, that was a lengthy explanation. That's the end of session 6. Please don't be overawed when the bees begin the swarming process. It's a big part of beekeeping, and the beekeeper who can implement a successful swarm control method which separates one of these from the other 2. Remember, the flying bees, the queen and nurse bees will be in control of the bees, will enjoy their beekeeping more, and will reap a greater honey harvest. I've shown you 3 methods of swarm control, and although they all work to a degree, I recommend you stick to the Nucleus method until you have mastered that, and then, if you want to, have a try the others. In the final session, session 7, I will be going through some swarming theory that you need to understand, and will give you some practical tips to aid your swarming strategy. If you are enjoying these videos, please like and subscribe below, and consider buying me a beer, more appropriate than coffee in the heat of Spain, on my buymeacoffee.com site, where you will find lots of bee-related articles. The link is under the description below. Thank you to those of you who already bought me a beer. It will help keep this channel going. I also appreciate any comments or questions, and promise I will reply to them all. That's all for now. Adios amigos.